1v1, in the eyes of everyone, Yun Zhao was the crown princess forced to marry by Crown Prince Xiao Changyin. She has no love from her husband, so she will naturally face difficulties in the Eastern Palace. In fact, although this rumor may not be true, it is also not too false. Yun Zhao is not living as sadly as everyone thinks. She longs for this person to stay far away from her, so she doesn't want any further involvement. She consciously and steadily huddled in the Fanghua Palace, but the man who despised her always found various ways to trouble her. Yun Zhao thought that once the man ascended to the throne, he should be able to eliminate her need and abolish her. However, she waited, and what came was not the title of deposed crown princess, but the decree of the posthumous emperor. Keywords of the novel. Has Your Highness the Crown Prince's chasing wife crematorium today? No pop-ups. Has Your Highness the Crown Prince chasing wife crematorium today? Download the full text. Has Your Highness the Crown Prince chasing wife crematorium today? Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Wind Rises. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Wind Rises. 15 minutes ago, Yun Zhao learned 3 things. Firstly, Bei Xiao led his troops to break through the city gate of Yun State, and Yun State was devastated and unable to turn the tide. Secondly, her father and Empress were captured and nowhere to be found. Thirdly, it was her husband Mengyin, who had been married for less than 3 months, who collaborated with General Bei Xiao both internally and externally. His true identity was actually the Crown Prince of Bei Xiao, Xiao Changyin. The surroundings were noisy and chaotic, with only the palace members of Fanghua Palace still surrounding Yun Zhao, while the rest of them died and fled, spreading the smell of killing and blood around. Where are the father and queen? Yun Zhao looked up with unprecedented calmness in his eyes. Sushi listened anxiously to the commotion outside and said, Your Majesty and Empress are nowhere to be found, but I believe they have already fled. Princess, you should leave quickly. I'm afraid the people of Bei Xiao will soon find them here. Yun Zhao lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the little rabbit in his hand. A grass-woven little rabbit with ink on its eyes. This was before she entered the palace this morning, Mengyin. No, it was Xiao Changyin who put it in her hand. She let go of her hands and the little rabbit fell to the ground. It rolled around a few times, covered in a lot of dust. Let's go, she said. Sushi breathed a sigh of relief and quickly instructed people to find something that was convenient. If they encountered people from Bei Xiao, they wouldn't be unable to do anything. But just as she turned around, she found that Yun Zhao, who was originally sitting there, had disappeared. Yun Zhao walked out from the back door of the side hall of the Fanghua Palace, and what caught his eye were the panicked palace attendants fleeing and the scattered delicacies. She didn't stop, but continued walking forward. Along the way, many palace officials stopped to persuade her to escape. Yun Zhao smiled and said she knew how to leave, but she was heading towards the city gate. Yunhua is easy to defend but difficult to attack, and never makes enemies with others. If it weren't for internal cooperation and external cooperation, Yunhua would not have suffered such a catastrophic disaster today. And here, inside and outside, Yun Zhao knew that it could not be just Xiao Changyin. Otherwise, the palace's forbidden guards will not appear, and the soldiers in the court will not come to guard. But if it weren't for Xiao Changyin, there wouldn't be soldiers from northern Xiao here. Her father once selected a husband for her, but she stubbornly brought Xiao Changyin back and insisted that he be his son. Law. It was her marriage to Xiao Changyin that brought this disaster to Yun State. It seems that the guards at the city gate are no longer obedient to their father's orders, and Yun Zhao does not know them either. I'm going up. As 2 guards walked over, Yun Zhao suddenly pulled out the hairpin from her bun. One end was sharpened by her, and it quickly pierced through her delicate skin by pressing against her neck. Blood oozed out. Anyway, I am still the princess of Yun Kingdom, or the wife of Xiao Changyin, who is bowing down and bowing to you. If I die in front of you, no matter which side it is, you will not be able to please me. So, do you still want to stop me? The guards hesitated and looked around, but as expected, they didn't dare to step forward. The leading man was wearing the clothes of a general from the Yun kingdom, and Yun Zhao recognized it. The jade plaque hanging around the man's waist was clearly engraved with the word Yi. It's her fifth uncle Yun Yi's person. Yun Zhao should have been surprised. After all, Uncle Wu Huang was very gentle in his behavior, but at this moment she couldn't muster the energy to express her surprise. She walked up the steps and walls step by step. There was a fight here before, and the remaining light fell on the city wall. There were bloodstains that had been dried by the wind and turned into deep reddish brown. This road was shorter than she had imagined, and after a while, she stood at the highest point. There are guards on both sides who obey the orders of the fifth emperor uncle, probably afraid of her doing anything, and also afraid of her not doing anything. There was the sound of armor and weapons colliding, and the sound of neat and heavy footsteps. She stepped up and stood with her toes on the city wall, but with just a gentle movement, she would fall and be shattered to pieces. The city wall is very high, and if she falls down, she cannot live. Yun Zhao, come here. Upon hearing the cold and familiar voice, Yun Zhao lowered his eyebrows and eyes, his gaze touching the pattern on the edge of his sleeve. He saw a dragon swimming in the clouds, which was a pattern that only the royal family of Yun could use. As a princess of Yun Kingdom, she not only failed to bring any benefits to the people of Yun Kingdom, but also brought them disasters. Even if she jumps down from here and falls to pieces, it cannot make up for the mistake she made. Her wide sleeves were blown to the sound of hunting, and her gaze gradually rose from the edge of the sleeves. It landed on Xiao Changyin's face. In the moment of looking at each other, countless images flashed through Yun Zhao's mind. Her fingers curled slightly and tightly grasped the blood-stained hairpin, trying to pierce it into his heart. But she can't. There are many people around Xiao Changyin, and she doesn't have this ability. Furthermore, if Crown Prince Xiao died in her hands, the people of Yun Kingdom would not have a good fate. Xiao Changyin took 2 steps forward, but saw that her body seemed to be leaning back, so he paused and looked at her with crimson eyes, his fingers clenched tightly, appearing blue and white. At this moment, Yun Zhao was very calm, as if there was no such hatred between the two. Yun Zhao. Xiao Changyin tightened his left hand, with bulging veins on the back of his hand, and extended his right hand towards her. It's high there, come over here. Under the coldness in the man's eyes, there is a deep fear hidden. If I were to die, no one in this world would say that Prince Xiao, in order to achieve his goals, resorted to any means, acted despicably and shamelessly, used a woman to marry him and deceive his trust, and ultimately destroyed his country. I don't think your Highness, the Crown Prince, would you be willing to carry this reputation on your back in the future? Even if one wins or loses, the fact is determined by the winner, but rumors cannot be stopped. Can cover one person's mouth, but cannot cover the mouths of millions. Yun Zhao also knew that these were just irrelevant to him, and she couldn't do anything after all. Yun Zhao, your father and Empress are still alive, and I didn't kill them. Xiao Changyin understood what she cared most about, and his face became particularly gloomy. He continued, if you dare to jump down, I will kill them, including these people. His gaze fell faintly on the people fleeing around under the city tower, his gaze indifferent as if he were not looking at a single person, but at ants one by one. He doesn't care about the life and death of these ants. In his eyes, these ants are just a means to exploit Yun Zhao's softness. Yun Zhao, you know, I would do this. Yes, she knew he would do it, so at this moment, she hesitated, her legs seemed to be filled with lead, and she couldn't even decide to jump down. Your Highness, your Majesty ordered early in the morning that the royal family of Yun State cannot stay, said a man in black clothes behind Xiao Changyin, frowning. Prince Xiao, you promised me to kill them all. What does this mean now, said Yun Yi, the fifth uncle of Yun Zhao. Xiao Changyin's gaze was fixed on Yun Zhao, but his left hand gestured to Fan Zhou beside him. Fan Zhou knew it clearly and turned around calmly, with the long sword in his hand piercing through Yun Yi's body with ease. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Conformity. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Conformity. The blood sprayed out all over Fan Zhou's body, but he just expressionlessly pulled out his long sword. Yun Yi widened his eyes, as if he couldn't believe there would be such a scene. Before he could point his fingers at Xiao Changyin, he fell down. When Yun Zhao was stunned by this, Xiao Changyin took a few steps forward and pulled out his whip, which wrapped around her waist. Yun Zhao's body couldn't control itself and fell forward. He threw away the whip, hugged the person with both hands, and only breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that she had truly landed in his arms. With a loud bang, Yun Zhao lifted his hand and gave him a hard slap. Xiao Changyin, however, did not get angry. Under his drooping eyes, there was an almost imperceptible ease. Just turning around, he regained his cold expression. He tightly grasped Yun Zhao's hand, and the panic in his heart gradually eased at this moment. Yun Zhao couldn't break free, and Xiao Changyin took big steps, almost staggering in being dragged along. "Your Highness, this woman cannot stay." The man in Xuani followed behind, frowning tightly. Fan Zhou immediately pressed his long sword, still stained with blood, against the neck of the man in Xuani and said coldly, "You are reckless." "Your Highness, why do you need to judge?" Fan Zhou. Xiao Changyin slowly raised his hand as Fan Zhou pressed a blood mark on the neck of the man in Xuani, indicating that Fan Zhou would put down his sword. The man in Xuani, upon seeing this, although dissatisfied with Xiao Changyin's actions, had no choice but to cover his bloody neck and retreat to the side. On the other hand, the chaotic imperial city quickly quieted down, and in front of the main hall, not only were the troops brought by Xiao Changyin, but also the Yunguo Forbidden Army who had been deployed earlier came to escort them. The two sides are facing each other, with swords and swords touching each other. There is a faint atmosphere of tension around, and the battle seems to be on the verge of breaking out. The generals led by Bei Xiao furrowed their brows, not expecting the Yunguo Forbidden Army to rush over so quickly. Even if the Forbidden Army of Yun Kingdom rushed over, they dared not act recklessly at this moment, because the Emperor and Empress of Yun Kingdom were in the main hall, and in front of the hall was a circle of northern Xiao soldiers. As they were about to move on both sides, a sound suddenly came from behind, and the Imperial Army couldn't help but leave a path on either side. Xiao Changyin looked at the road left and pulled Yun Zhao forward. The Yunguo Forbidden Army on both sides made way for the Yun Zhao in Xiao Changyin's hand, but the swords in his hand were tightly clenched. Yun Zhao was pulled away, but his eyes stared blankly at these swords. "If you order them to kill me, Zhao, with you, I am not afraid of death." He lowered his voice and said, "But if I die, the entire Yun Kingdom will suffer a catastrophic disaster." Yun Zhao's raised hand stiffened slightly, hanging in mid-air and slowly falling down, with drooping eyelids covering the emotions inside. The general of Bei Xiao frowned upon seeing this, as if the scene before him was different from what he had expected. However, when Fan Zhou came over and spoke to him for a while, he immediately followed the instructions and led the crowd to scatter to both sides. After seeing the father, emperor, and mother surrounded in the center of the main hall, Yun Zhao's eyes heated up and he couldn't help but shed tears. She had never seen the appearance of her father and queen before. The two of them were no longer as refined and gentle as before, and at this moment, they were as dejected and powerless as trapped beasts. She trembled uncontrollably, trying to step forward and lean against them, but was pulled by Xiao Changyin. Xiao Changyin raised her hand and said to the two, "The people are innocent. Bei Xiao has no intention of being enemies with the kingdom of Yun. Therefore, as the crown princess of Bei Xiao, she seeks to marry Princess Yun Zhao of the kingdom of Yun for 100 years of peace between the two countries." Emperor Yun Qin slowly looked up at Xiao Changyin, his lips wriggling a few times, and asked, "What is 100-year peace between the two countries?" Yun Qin wouldn't be foolish enough to think that Bei Xiao had caused this incident, he just wanted to make it clear. They colluded with Yun Yi, probably in exchange for this throne, so how could they say they had no intention of being enemies with Yun state, and how could they seek peace between the two countries? In Yun Qin's view, the cooperation between Yun Yi and Xiao Changyin was just playing tricks on the tiger. How could someone who could betray his brother and the king be trusted by Xiao Changyin? I don't think Yun Yi's fate will be good either. Yun Qin still doesn't know that Yun Yi has lost his life. Yun Kingdom is attached to Beixiao, with Beixiao as the leader. Xiao Changyin said, his cold voice paused, and then he said, "It is well known that His Majesty Yun Kingdom loves the people like a son, and I don't want to see scenes of blood flowing and people being displaced." Empress Ling Xue's bun beside Yun Qin was disheveled, and there were scratches on her face from being caught. However, her back remained firm, and even if she were to die at this moment, she would not refuse. After an unknown amount of time, Yun Qin turned his head and looked around. He didn't know how the forbidden guards of Yun Kingdom could come over now, but even here, they couldn't resist the people of Beixiao. It's just an increase in casualties. Yun Qin slowly closed his eyes and tightly grasped Ling Xue's hand. "I will use half of the country as the dowry for Princess Yun Zhao," he said. Xiao Changyin raised his hand and signaled for everyone to leave. Then he asked the palace staff to take Yun Qin and Ling Xue to the dormitory to tidy up their wounds and change their clothes. Yun Zhao broke free from his hand and stumbled along. Xiao Changyin didn't stop, he knew she wouldn't leave. The surroundings have regained calmness, and if it weren't for the untreated blood on the ground, one would have thought that today's incident had never happened from beginning to end. "Father, Empress." Yun Zhao knelt in front of the two, tears streaming down her face. She wiped the corners of her eyes with her hand and, in embarrassment, suppressed the constantly overflowing tears. "Zhao Zhao," Yun Qin gently stroked her head and said in a warm voice, "Father cannot protect you. Beixiao is not like Yunguo. You must be careful in everything in the future. Nevertheless, you must always remember that you married for the sake of peace between the two countries, and you have half of the land of Yun at your disposal. No one can bully you at will." Yun Zhao was trembling all over, his voice filled with hatred. "Father, Queen Mother, I don't want these things. I will definitely kill him," he said. "You don't recognize me, so even if I kill him, they can't blame you." The dormitory should be filled with their people, but Ling Xue still carefully looked around. Ling Xue had a gentle expression on her face, but her voice was very serious. She held her hand and said, "You're foolish again. Beixiao wants to attack the Yun Kingdom, so why can't you find any reason? Moreover, if something happens to you, what if you call your father, emperor, and mother? Zhao Zhao, don't hate." Not long after, a stranger from the palace arrived at the door, and Yun Zhao couldn't stay here. She walked out and looked at Xiao Changyin standing under the eaves. He seemed like nothing had happened before and even reached out his hand to her. Yun Zhao remembered the city tower just now. If only she had jumped down quickly before he came, but at this moment she could only put her hand on his. "Your Highness, what exactly do you want?" Yun Zhao looked up and saw the setting sun shining on his face, adding a touch of softness to his cold and stern appearance. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Leaving. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Leaving. Xiao Changyin turned his head and looked at her steadily, but his voice suddenly cooled down. "I need a crown princess from Yun Kingdom." Yun Zhao looked at him for a long time, shook his hand hard, her gaze calm, and she heard herself lightly respond, "Okay." It didn't seem like her voice, but it was genuine and came from her mouth. After walking forward for not 2 steps, Yun Zhao saw the man in Xuanyi he met while in the city tower. Behind the man in Xuanyi was a girl with a graceful figure and a beautiful face. She knows. This person is Yun Yi's daughter Yun Xueling, who is called cousin by blood. They grew up almost together from a young age, and their relationship is very deep. It's what she thinks is profound. The woman didn't wait for the man in Xuanyi to speak, so she quickly walked up and knelt down, crying, "Your Highness, the father of my daughter, I don't know what's going on, but I lost my life here. What will my daughter do in the future?" The fact that Yunyi lost his life is not a secret. Everyone knows that it was under the command of Fan Zhou, who was only under the command of Crown Prince Xiao Changyin, so it could only be under the command of Xiao Changyin. The woman seemed to have cried before, her eyes were red and swollen, her face was unpainted, and her pink cheeks were flushed. At this moment, kneeling on the ground and crying profusely, my body was half bent on the ground trembling, making me look even more pitiful. Before Xiao Changyin could say anything, Yun Zhao recited 2 words. "My daughter." Yun Xueling's figure stiffened, and when she looked up, she saw Yun Zhao looking at her with a smile on her face. She spoke plainly and asked, "Is this voice from my cousin to the Crown Prince of Beishao?" This means that Uncle Wu had already obeyed Northern Shao and was already a vassal of Northern Shao, right? The man in black frowned even more upon hearing this, his eyes filled with dissatisfaction with Yun Zhao. But when Xiao Changyin was here, he didn't say anything and only gave Yun Xueling a glance. Yun Xueling understood clearly that this was her last chance. For some reason, it was clear that as previously agreed, her father would replace Yun Zhao's father as the emperor of Yun State, and she would also follow Prince Xiao Changyin of Northern Shao. But now everything has changed. Her father inexplicably lost his life, and Yun Zhao's father was still the emperor of Yun State. Yun Zhao also wanted to become the crown princess of Beishao. Yun Xueling is very clear that she cannot stay in Yun Kingdom. Even if this matter is erased, the fact that her father conspired with the people of Beishao to obtain the throne will still be known by the people of Yun Kingdom. She cannot stay here. She has only one choice and only wants to make that choice. I saw Yun Xueling looking up, first giving Yun Zhao a aggrieved look, then looking at Xiao Changyin. With a mournful expression, "My father died for Yun Kingdom. Zhao, even if you hate me, you shouldn't have tarnished my father because of this." Yun Zhao's eyes drooped and he stared at her for a moment. When Yun Xueling thought she was about to erupt, she just slowly turned around and walked in the other direction. Yun Zhao's action made Yun Xueling feel as if she had punched cotton, soft and powerless, and all the effort put into the play was in vain. Xiao Changyin didn't chase after him, his expression still icy cold. "Even though you were sent by your father, it's not your turn to take care of the isolated matter." This statement is obviously directed at the man in Xuanyi. Yun Zhao didn't care about what was going on between the two of them. If there was really something, she might still feel happy. Xiao Changyin gave her 3 days, during which Yun Kingdom seemed to have never changed, and everything remained the same as before. She looked at the palace maids walking back and forth in a daze, and for a moment, she felt like she had just had a dream. She lowered her head and looked at the small rabbit in the dormitory that had been trampled flat and couldn't be seen. She squatted down and picked it up, staring blankly for a long time before throwing it into the pond in the yard. The pond was very deep, and after a while, the water surface returned to calm. Occasionally, dewdrops from lotus leaves dripped down, causing ripples one after another. On the day of departure, the weather was excellent, and the sun hung high in the sky, even glaring. Yun Zhao raised his hand and saw through his fingers that the clouds in the sky had spread and closed. She had someone take back the wedding dress sent by Xiao Changyin, wearing only ordinary palace attire, and said, "Well, the journey is long, and wearing a wedding dress will inevitably bring many inconveniences. It's not too late to change it when you arrive at Beishao." The road between Yunhua and Beishao is indeed far, and it took more than 10 days to cover the distance. Due to continuous rain, it stopped in the middle of the road. Yun Zhao sat on the ground paved with hay, throwing the branches in his hand into the fire one by one. Xiao Changyin had originally intended to sit over, but as soon as he came over, Yun Zhao stood up, so Xiao Changyin could only stay away from her. Not long after, a man walked over with 2 pieces of dry food in his hand. Yun Zhao looked up, although she didn't know the man's name, she had a deep impression of him. On the city tower, he brought Yun Xueling to meet Xiao Changyin. It is obvious that he is not dealing with Xiao Changyin. Yun Zhao took the dry food from his hand, said thank you, and then broke it into pieces and put it into hot water. The man didn't leave, but instead sat not far from her, deliberately lowering his voice. Do you know, princess? Where did that Miss Yun go? Is it Yun Xueling? To be honest, Yun Zhao cares about many people and things, but these definitely do not include the life and death of Yun Xueling. She watched as the dry food soaked in hot water became much softer, so she picked up a bowl and took small bites to eat. After a while, seeing that he hadn't left yet, he replied, "Where is she going? What does it matter to me?" The man seemed to have never expected her to say so, with a surprised and somewhat incredulous expression on his face. Anyway, Miss Yun is the princess's cousin, with deep blood ties. Since the young master has a heart of pity for her, why not stay in Yun Kingdom or bring her along? Yun Zhao only ate half of the dry food, wrapped the rest in a handkerchief, and stood up in the man's astonished expression. She took a few steps and sat down in a different place. It rained all night and stopped at dawn. Yun Zhao slept very lightly, feeling as if there was someone around him in a hazy way, and immediately opened his eyes. She was wearing a cloak, and Xiao Changyin was holding a corner of it in his hand. Yun Zhao was stunned for a moment, and before he could even think about it, he heard Xiao Changyin say, "If you're sick, your marriage will have to be postponed." Yun Zhao sat up and her cloak slipped off her body. She picked it up and handed it back to Xiao Changyin, saying expressionlessly, "Your Highness, rest assured. Since I have agreed, I will definitely become the crown princess that your Highness wants." Seeing the disappointment in her eyes, Xiao Changyin's heart slightly froze, but he didn't show any signs on his face. His throat rolled and his well-defined cheeks tightened. He frowned and reminded, "Don't have any dealings with Xingyu, he's not a good person." End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Big Marriage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Big Marriage. Xingyu. I think it's the man who came to talk to her last night. She endured the bitterness in her mouth and stood up with her back to him. "Your Highness, I dare not disobey your orders." Yun Zhao didn't bring many people from Yun Kingdom, and there were only Su Shi and the nursing mother surnamed Zhao who had been watching her grow up since childhood in the palace. After sending her to Beishao, other palace guards will also return to Yun Kingdom. At this moment, the two of them couldn't help but hesitate upon seeing such a scene. They had intended to come over and advise, but the rain had already stopped. Yun Zhao took a step out and got on the carriage, then pulled down the curtains on both sides to cover it tightly. In the following days, she did not see Xiao Changyin again. She heard his general Fan Zhou say that Xiao Changyin had some matters and needed to lead troops back first. Of course, he didn't ignore her either, and he also left more than half of the soldiers to protect her, which shows the sincerity of his treatment of her. That's what Fan Zhou said to her. Yun Zhao didn't interrupt, but he couldn't help feeling sarcastic in his heart. "General Fan, if you were me, would you consider nothing to have happened?" As Fan Zhou continued to talk about how deeply Xiao Changyin was affectionate and how sincere he was towards her, Yun Zhao couldn't help but interrupt and ask. At this point in the matter, whether she truly cares or not has no meaning. Fan Zhou suddenly got stuck and didn't know what to say. After looking at Yun Zhao for a while, he had to leave with a casual expression. Half a month later, the carriage arrived at Longjing in Beishao. The carriage did not stop, but drove directly into the imperial city. She was placed in the eastern palace and after a brief rest, she went to meet the emperor of Beishao. As soon as she stepped into Guangming Palace, she saw the sound of teacups pounding heavily on the ground inside. She paused in her footsteps, and the attendant on the side, Shoan, quickly bent down and said, "Princess, please come in quickly. Your Majesty has been waiting for the princess for a long time." The Guangming Palace is the main hall of the emperor's sleeping quarters, where the emperor usually meets with his ministers. Yun Zhao walked in and greeted the emperor with the gift of Beishao. He said in a slow voice, Yun Zhao has seen your majesty before. She knelt on the ground for a long time, feeling a sharp pain in both knees, only to hear the man above exclaim in surprise. Hurry up, please. I was confused and forgot about you, so I knelt down. The emperor turned his head to look at Shoan and angrily said, I just forgot about it. Are you such a confused servant? Don't you remind me? Shoan immediately knelt down in panic, first apologizing to the emperor, and then apologizing to Yun Zhao. Yun Zhao gave the emperor a deep glance and said to Shoan, it's okay. The emperor narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly chuckled lightly. The princess is indeed as good in appearance and temperament as rumored, but unfortunately, my son is the coldest and uninteresting. He is like a wooden block on weekdays, and I'm afraid he may not be worthy of the princess. Yun Zhao couldn't grasp the emperor's intentions and remained silent. When she just came in, she saw blood oozing from Xiao Changyin's forehead, flowing all the way to his neck and not wiping it off. What she heard at the door was probably the emperor smashing the teacup onto Xiao Changyin's forehead. I have another son, who is younger and only 2 years older than the princess. Maybe there will be a lot to say to the princess. Xiao Changyin's hands, covered by the wide long sleeves, gradually clenched and his knuckles turned white. Yun Zhao did not show any surprise at the emperor's behavior, only said, I will obey your majesty's orders. The emperor looked at her for a long time, as if trying to discern the meaning of her words. After a while, he sighed again, although I am willing to do this, if I continue, I'm afraid the crown prince will be anxious. He treated his words just now as a joke and said with a smile, you two go back together. I won't disturb your relationship either. Yun Zhao lowered his head at the right time, showing a shy expression. Xiao Changyin frowned slightly, gave Yun Zhao an impatient glance, nodded helplessly, and finally walked out. After the two of them had been away for a long time, the emperor suddenly asked Shoan, how do you think the crown prince treated her? Sweat dripped down from Shoan's forehead, but he dared not reach out to wipe it. He trembled and said, how dare I say that? I forgive your innocence. Upon hearing this, Shoan could only probe, I thought that His Highness the Crown Prince seemed to dislike the princess very much. The emperor pinched his chin thoughtfully and asked, what reaction did the empress have? Or did someone send someone over here? Shoan knelt down nervously and fearfully, lowering his head and trying not to tremble in his voice. If you return to your majesty, the empress may have been busy with the affairs of the harem, so she didn't send anyone over. The emperor's expression instantly sank, and he only looked faintly at Shoan, whose entire upper body was already lying on the ground. He drove and brushed the Yinglu. He said the Fuiying Tower is the residence of concubine Zheng, the favored concubine, and the son mentioned by the emperor to Yun Zhao earlier, who is only 2 years older than her, is exactly from concubine Zheng. The two walked together, and even if Yun Zhao didn't turn to him, Yu Guang would still sweep over his face with a hint of absence. Seeing his clearly cold and unabashed expression of disgust, as well as the indifferent aura emanating from his body, Yun Zhao made an effort to recall what he had been like in the past. However, for a long time, what appeared in her memory was his majestic ride on a horse, leading the soldiers of northern Xiao to break through the city gate of Yun Kingdom. This marriage was arranged hastily, but it was more grand than Yun Zhao had imagined. She changed into her wedding dress, holding a piece of red silk in her hand, and walked step by step up the stone steps with Xiao Changyin. Standing on both sides are courtiers, with the emperor, empress, and empress dowager sitting above. She wore a very high bun today, and the high bun was covered in emerald beads. The emerald beads and heavy formal attire all over her body seemed like chains one after another. Yun Zhao could barely squeeze out joy and shyness when facing the few sitting above her, while Xiao Changyin beside her couldn't even disguise herself. As long as you pay a little attention here, you will realize that the crown prince is very dissatisfied with this crown princess. Yun Zhao felt very calm in her heart, and she was led to the East Palace and then to the sleeping hall. When she arrived earlier, she had already entered this dormitory once. Outside the dormitory, there was a plaque with the words Fanghua on it. As the sun gradually darkened, the rituals and music outside did not stop. Beixiao and Yunhua are generally far apart, with many differences in etiquette. For example, at this moment, she is not covering her xipa, but holding a red fan tightly with both hands, and the tassels fall down from both sides and sway slightly. A pair of candles on the opposite platform burned halfway, and on the table was melted and slightly solidified candle oil. Yun Zhao looked at it for a long time, and his eyes were a bit sore. He blinked his eyes, his hands couldn't help but move, and the fan tilted to one side. The palace attendant standing beside her stood up and said, "Crown Princess, Your Highness the Crown Prince has not come yet. You must not put down the fan without permission." Yun Zhao could only rearrange the fan and cover his face upon hearing this. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Is Night. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 is Night. The fan shrouded in front of her for half a day, feeling extremely suffocated. Just as she had just rearranged herself, there seemed to be an older aunt beside the palace attendant who was speaking. She walked over and said, "Your Highness, I'm afraid there may be some political matters to delay for a while. I'll serve the Crown Princess with some food first." As she spoke, she took the fan from Yun Zhao's hand and led him to sit down at the mahogany table a few steps ahead. Because the expression on her face was the first one Yun Zhao came here to see who looked kind and gentle, Yun Zhao forgot to refuse for a moment. "Just call me Auntie Qiu, the Crown Princess." Autumn Moon waved and gestured for Su Shi to come over. "You come and serve the Crown Princess for dinner." The palace attendant, who had just spoken, looked embarrassed at this moment, but had no courage to speak. He silently shrank aside, afraid of being noticed by the Autumn Moon. During this period, Qiuyue was worried that Yun Zhao would not be used to being watched by others, so she asked more than 10 palace attendants around her to come down and explain several times, saying that the Crown Prince has been very busy these days and often hasn't finished his work until midnight before today. Xiao Changyin couldn't come over, and Yun Zhao breathed a sigh of relief. Her mood when facing Xiao Changyin now was not as calm as she thought. After finishing the meal, Autumn Moon looked at the time, cut the candles, and then put down the tent. Through the thin curtain, Yun Zhao seemed to see the bright white moonlight falling on the ground. She opened her eyes, thinking she wouldn't be able to sleep, but soon felt her eyelids heavy. In the mist, she seemed to hear the sound of bamboo flute, with a familiar melody and a leisurely yet reassuring feeling, gradually drifting into her dreams, taking her away from this lonely place and bringing her home. In the second half of the night, Qiuyue, who was guarding at the door, brought a cup of strong tea to Su Shi. The older Zhao Mama couldn't bear it, so Qiuyue asked people to rest, and she and Su Shi guarded one by one. After a while, there was noise coming from outside, and the two of them looked over. I saw that Xiao Changyin's face was not good, and behind him was a close attendant. Autumn Moon couldn't help but frown. His Highness the Crown Prince doesn't seem to have come voluntarily. So when Xiao Changyin entered, Autumn Moon held down Su Shi, who was in a hurry to get angry, and pulled the attendant aside to ask, "What's going on?" The maid's name was Mu Yi, and she said with a bitter face, "Auntie Qiu, Your Highness used to handle political affairs in the study. Later, Your Majesty sent someone over to reprimand Your Highness, so." The Autumn Moon was clear, and the Crown Prince came here, which was quite like being forced by His Majesty. Thinking of this, she became worried. Inside the hall, Xiao Changyin walked a few steps to the bed, his steps light and almost silent. At this moment, he lifted his hand and lifted the curtain, his gaze fixed on her. This stunned moment was actually just a few moments. Xiao Changyin slowly sat down, pressed his finger on the back of her neck, and then casually picked up a nearby teacup with peace of mind, using his strength to smash it to the ground. Su Shi at the door was startled and eager to break in, but was stopped by the Autumn Moon. Autumn Moon approached and tentatively spoke, "Your Highness." It seemed to have calmed down inside, but a man's impatient voice came in, "You're not allowed to come in." The autumn moon hesitated for a moment and did not move forward again. The disgust and coldness displayed when there were others were different, and at this moment, his eyes were astonishingly affectionate. "Zhao Zhao." He pinched her fingertips and lightly touched her lips, holding her in his arms with a cherished emptiness. In the middle of the night, he remained awake, looking at her as if he couldn't see enough. For him, it is the mercy of heaven, but for him, it is a lost and regained. The next morning, before Yun Zhao woke up, the broken porcelain pieces on the ground had already been cleaned up, and Xiao Changyin naturally had already left. She had just woken up with confusion in her eyes. However, soon after seeing that Su Shi, who was closest to her, was wearing the attire of a Beishao Palace resident, she regained consciousness. During breakfast, Chuyue carefully explained to Yun Zhao, "Recently, Your Highness the Crown Prince has been busy and often has troubles. If your words are not appropriate, please don't take it to heart. Autumn moon refers to last night's event. After all, it has already caused so much trouble that it's about to throw a cup." Yun Zhao actually didn't know about this. She didn't even know that Xiao Changyin had come last night, so she nodded and said, "Auntie Chiu, don't worry, I don't care." Chuyue felt that the answer didn't seem quite right, but she didn't react either. After resting for a quarter of an hour after finishing breakfast, Yun Zhao went to greet the Empress. In Yongning Palace, the Empress sat by the window with a piece of paper filled with words in her hand. She glanced briefly and then asked someone to put it aside. "I'll go get and burn these dirty things," said Feng Mama, who was close to her. The queen looked out of the window in a daze, but shook her head. "No need, I've seen so many dirty things before. Moreover, isn't that exactly what he showed me?" Mammy Feng sighed silently and tried to persuade her, when the queen said, "Go and put some sweet dim sum and change tea into milk. I remember the princess is still young." As he was speaking, Yun Zhao had already arrived at the door and greeted the Empress first. "Get up and sit here." The queen pointed to the opposite position, pushed the dim sum at hand, and then looked at Mammy Feng and motioned for her to lead people down. When only the two of them were left around, the Empress looked at the girl in front of her with a complicated expression. When Yun Zhao looked up, she quickly suppressed these complexities. She took out a wooden box from one side and opened it, which contained a pair of high-quality jade rings. The whole body has no impurities and is very transparent, even the clear tea on the side is inferior to it. This is Ming. The Empress's voice paused and continued, "These are a pair of jade rings that I got in my early years, perfect for you." Without waiting for Yun Zhao to speak, the Empress took out the jade ring and placed it on Yun Zhao's hand, one left and one right, praising him a few more words. "The dining room doesn't often make these dim sum. How delicious are you? If you feel it's not good, I'll have them adjust their taste." These words and actions stunned Yun Zhao. She knew that the Empress was the biological mother of Xiao Changyin, so she never thought that getting along would be like this. The queen seemed to have guessed her thoughts, but did not answer her questions. Instead, she chuckled lightly and said, "This milk contains honey, which you little girls like to drink the most." The Empress is right. Yun Zhao really loves sweet food. When she was young, she often had to fight her parents and empresses for a few candies. If she couldn't fight, she would cry and go find her grandfather, and then she would get everything. But now, she may never see them again in her lifetime. Milk mixed with honey is sweet, but it tastes bitter. "Mother," she said, not knowing whether she was addressing the queen in front of her or remembering her mother, "I think these pastries taste great." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Doubts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Doubts, just like it. The Crown Prince is always busy. If you feel bored staying in the East Palace, come to me. Yun Zhao hesitated for a moment, didn't refuse, and even nodded, pursed his lips and smiled, as long as the mother doesn't mind her courtiers. At this moment, Madame Feng shouted loudly at the door, "I have seen your majesty and your highness the crown prince." Watching the two of them enter, Aunt Feng's eyes were filled with sorrow, thinking that in the future, these schemes and conspiracies might have to be exposed to the public. Xiao Changyin walked behind the emperor and didn't even look at Yun Zhao when he came in. He first bowed to the empress and said, "I have seen my mother." The empress ignored him and instead called a palace attendant to serve tea to the emperor. If Xiao Changyin followed the plan made by the emperor earlier and captured Yun State, even if Yun Zhao became the crown princess, the emperor would not come. But now, although Yun State has surrendered to Beishao, only 10,000 Beishao soldiers are left stationed there. If there is any dissent over there, only 10,000 soldiers will not be useful. But Yungua is easy to defend but difficult to attack. If they want to send someone over, they cannot force an attack. This is also the reason why the emperor has had a bad face towards Xiao Changyin these days. Fortunately, Yunguo was a clever and witty person who married his daughter and brought half of the country with him. For this reason, the emperor had to offer up the princess of the Cloud Kingdom, and whoever was the crown prince, she had to be the crown princess. So he came over today and recognized this crown princess. Just the emperor lowered his gaze and fell on the kneeling Xiao Changyin, always suspecting that the crown prince had tampered with this matter. Do you want Yunguo to become the guard of honor behind him? This is also impossible. Yun Kingdom is far away from Beishao, and the crown prince cannot take advantage of it. If this is to make the courtiers choose him, it is not right. The crown prince has a legitimate name and has gained considerable fame in the court over the years. There is no crown princess from the kingdom of Yun, and his reputation will not be reduced by half. The emperor was puzzled, but he didn't want to believe the excuses given to him by the crown prince. It is said that it is for the sake of Beishao, for his sake, to let the world know that he governs the country with benevolence, to make the world appreciate his usefulness, tolerance, and ability to persuade others with virtue. The emperor mentioned in this statement is not wrong. He is too skilled in using the thunderbolt technique of the Cloud Kingdom, which will inevitably attract people who are afraid and dissatisfied to unite and resist the Northern Xiao. This is something the emperor does not want to see. Xiao Changyin returned to Lanjing half a month ago and went to Guangming Palace to apologize to the emperor before resting. During this time, there was no mention of marriage at all, only that one's heart was focused on the emperor's benevolent reputation. The emperor was extremely angry and knew that the situation was irreversible, so he used marriage as a probe. Xiao Changyin answered everything according to the emperor's wishes. In private, the emperor also invited people around Xiao Changyin to ask, and after learning how Xiao Changyin endured impatience and displeasure with Yun Zhao in the state of Yun, he pondered for a while and directly wrote an edict to marry him in the court. The courtiers had no objections, but initially Xiao Changyin remained frozen there. It was only after the courtiers followed suit and advised him a few words that he knelt down to accept the marriage offer. If you think so, it seems that only the crown prince's reasons are not like cheating. It has been half a quarter of an hour since Xiao Changyin entered and knelt on the ground to salute. The emperor intentionally looked at the empress and saw her casually fiddling with the flowers on the table, while also leisurely picking up scissors to build flower branches. Her son, who was pregnant in October, knelt on the ground, and her injuries had not yet healed. However, she refused to even give a glance. Yun Zhao didn't understand the current situation, especially since she had just bid farewell to the emperor. At this moment, she didn't know whether to sit down or kneel with Xiao Changyin. I haven't seen the empress for a long time, and for a moment I didn't notice the kneeling crown prince. Get up. Xiao Changyin stood up and silently walked towards the wooden chair brought to him by the palace officials. He sat in a wooden chair close to Yun Zhao, and at this moment, as he looked at the overlapping hem of his skirt, his left hand, if not, would also touch her sleeve. Xiao Changyin was in a good mood. The emperor, seeing that the empress never looked at him, tried to suppress his anger and said many polite words to Yun Zhao. Speaking to her, the emperor was looking in the direction of the empress, but unfortunately the empress did not look at him. Crown Princess, you should just treat this place like your family. If the Crown Prince bullies you, just tell me and I will definitely teach him a lesson. I have already reprimanded him for yesterday's incident. Zhao curled up his hands at the edge of his sleeves and obediently said, chaos is always the most important thing. The emperor nodded, satisfied with Zhao's interest. After a while, the voice of the attendant Shoan came from outside the door. Consort Zheng felt unwell and had already gone to seek medical attention from the imperial physician. She also asked the eunuch to invite the emperor over. The emperor stood up without any hesitation, his face urgent, and hurriedly left. Not long after the emperor left, Xiao Changyin also stood up, with a faint emotion in his voice, as if trying to suppress something. Several ministers are still waiting for their ministers to discuss important matters. When tomorrow is free, the ministers will come and pay their respects to the Empress Dowager. When these two people were gone from the room, the queen's expression suddenly returned to the gentle demeanor she had when she was with Zhao. The queen does not show much respect or admiration towards His Majesty, and does not seem to love her biological son as much. This was quite unexpected for Zhao, especially in contrast to the fact that the Empress treated her very gently. It was not until the afternoon that Zhao returned. During this period, the Empress accompanied her to the Empress Dowager's Conformity Palace to pay her respects. With the Empress Dowager present, the Empress Dowager did not show any coldness and changed the gift she gave. It's a few high-quality warm jade pieces. What was originally prepared was only a golden headband. As Zhao thanked her for her kindness, the Empress Dowager felt as reluctant as a knife, but she still had to show a gentle and kind concern. Speaking of the rest, it was mostly due to unwillingness, thinking that it would be better to cause trouble for the Crown Princess. He then said, the Crown Prince's older brothers have already had children at the age of. Previously, the Crown Prince had not married a wife, and it was not appropriate to enter the concubine in the Eastern Palace. However, now that he has married a wife, it is natural for the concubine to do more good for the sake of their offspring. Crown Princess, what do you think? Even in ordinary households, there is no reason for a newlywed woman to take a concubine as soon as she gets married, let alone the fact that this is the royal family. Xiao Changyin is also the Crown Prince. If he really takes a concubine, as the Empress Dowager said, the courtiers in the court can use their lip service and swear without repeating a word. The Empress Dowager was calculating in her heart. Although she didn't want the Crown Prince to ascend to that position, there was always a contingency in this world. If the person she sent over had an heir, she would have more choices in the future. Zhao is preparing to respond. Nowadays, she doesn't care how many concubines there are around Xiao Changyin. She still hopes that these concubines can entangle people and not let him come over. As for the Empress Dowager's obvious displeasure towards her, Zhao paid even less attention. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Empress Zheng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Empress Zheng. The East Palace and the Conformity Palace are far apart, and she only came to pay her respects. The Empress Dowager's displeasure will not make her eat 2 less meals. She thought the Empress Dowager was unhappy because she occupied the position of the Crown Princess, but in fact, this was not the whole reason. The position of the Crown Princess is destined not to fall within the Empress Dowager's family, and the Empress Dowager is aware of this, so she has always been interested in the position of the concubine beside the Crown Prince. Her dislike for Zhao actually stems from his identity. It is not accurate to say that Zhao's identity is also accurate. The Empress Dowager does not like noble women with similar identities as Zhao. She was born young and was favored by the late emperor for 2 years. Although this favor did not last long, it allowed her family to move forward. Now that she has become the Empress Dowager, every time she goes to various banquets, when everyone looks at her, she still feels that they are privately discussing whether she is not worthy of this position. Actually, it's not surprising that the Empress Dowager thinks so, because she was originally the Empress Dowager who was put up as a duck. The emperor's birth mother passed away early, and after ascending to power, she casually pointed at her and made her the Empress Dowager. She has a low rank, no children under her knee, and a foolish temperament. She is a person who is easy to handle, even if she has inappropriate thoughts, her methods will only be low-level and foolish. This is the reason why the emperor chose her. Before Yun Zhao spoke to respond, the empress lazily raised her eyes, her slender fingers slowly resting on the teacup. Does your majesty know about the Empress Dowager's idea? Of course, I don't know. The emperor wouldn't want the crown prince to take concubines. It's not that he wants the crown prince to be clean and self-disciplined, or that he doesn't want the crown prince to have offspring. But once this beginning is achieved, the courtiers in the court will one after another push their own daughters or sisters into the eastern palace. This situation is by no means what the emperor wants to see. He was in his prime, but the crown prince's wings were gradually growing. The Empress Dowager's expression was not very good, and her figure was slightly stiff. She was a bit angry that as Empress Dowager, she couldn't even make decisions about such a small matter. "Phone Mama, go and invite your majesty. This matter may seem small or big, but it's better for your majesty to know," the empress said casually to Phone Mama. Upon hearing this, Madame Phone quickly responded and then decided to retire to invite the emperor over. Seeing that she was really going to invite the emperor, the Empress Dowager kept calling out, "Wait a minute." The empress raised her eyebrows and said, "Does the Empress Dowager have any other matters to discuss?" The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth in hatred and said, after some thought, "The crown prince is young and the crown princess has just married. Let's put aside the matter of taking a concubine for now." She didn't stop talking, always thinking of finding an opportunity to push the girl from home in the future. In the next 2 days, Xiao Changyin took a leave and did not go out. There is a guard at the entrance of Fanghua Hall, sent by the emperor to keep Xiao Changyin here. There are only the two of them left here, Xiao Changyin standing in front of the bookshelf. The doors and windows are tightly locked, making the room appear somewhat dark. His body leaned slightly against the bookshelf, his slender fingers pressed against the bamboo slips, slowly tapping. There was a glass screen between the two, and Xiao Changyin could only vaguely see her figure. He curved his lips, his expression difficult to distinguish. Fragmented sunlight shone through the window, and several peonies on the windowsill swayed with the gentle breeze. He put down the bamboo slip in his hand and walked towards the screen. His expression remained as cold as usual, but only he knew how excited the heart in his chest was. He has dreamed of such scenes many times before. That was a dream many times, but the person in front of him was real. Xiao Changyin stopped at the screen, caressing a slightly rough tassel in his hand, about to say something, when in the afterglow he caught a glimpse of a figure. He withdrew his hand without leaving a trace and sat down in front of Yun Zhao. Yun Zhao thought he didn't exist and focused on reading a travelogue. Xiao Changyin picked up the travelogue at her hand and threw it away in Yun Zhao's puzzled eyes before leaving. Yun Zhao's gaze became even more puzzled. She even felt like she hadn't woken up, so she instinctively reached out and rubbed her eyes. The man in front of me did not disappear, still with a cold face, and on the ground not far away, there was indeed a book lying. This is not a dream, nor is it an illusion. Xiao Changyin sat beside her with a forced expression and said, "If it weren't for the emperor forcing me to come here, I wouldn't have stepped into this place in my lifetime." Yun Zhao is not a wooden person, and hearing these words naturally makes her uncomfortable. She slowly breathed a sigh of relief and took a few steps to pick up the book. After patting the dust on the book, he looked at Xiao Changyin and said, "If it weren't for you using your means, I wouldn't have appeared here in this lifetime." Xiao Changyin suddenly clenched his hands and his breathing became uncomfortable. Under the eaves outside, the palace people standing by the window gradually walked towards the courtyard. At this moment, Xiao Changyin closed the open window, brushed his sleeve against a peony plant, and his eyes drooped for an instant. Just as Yun Zhao thought he was about to leave, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. Yun Zhao was about to refuse, but he heard him say, "Father wants to be alone with you. I always want to let father know that I haven't broken my promise." As he spoke, Xiao Changyin pulled the person out. Autumn Moon at the door couldn't help but smile when she saw her face. She quickly pointed to two palace maids and specifically instructed them to follow from a distance. "I can walk by myself." Yun Zhao frowned. Xiao Changyin didn't listen and even held her hand with his back. The sleeves were too narrow to cover, and outsiders could only see the two holding hands tightly, looking at the good relationship. If we ignore the man's cold expression. From afar, the woman sitting in the Imperial Garden Pavilion squinted her eyes and asked the attendant next to her, "Have you inquired about it these past few days?" Shi Zhufu said, "It seems that the Crown Princess is not favored by the Crown Prince, but the Empress Dowager is very fond of her." The woman chuckled with a sarcastic tone and said, "Can we not be biased? Princes who are about the same age as the Crown Prince have legitimate sons, so why not be in a hurry to become empresses in this palace?" Shi Zhu smiled and said, "Your Majesty dotes on the Empress. She spoke well." The courtiers of Xiao Changyin's marriage urged him, and the Empress Dowager was concerned about it, but every time the Emperor blocked her. It is said that one should choose the best one, but in fact, those who have a little knowledge of the situation understand that Your Majesty does not want to choose a person with good family background as the Crown Princess, and is worried that choosing a bad one will be opposed by the courtiers, so he has been dragging on like this. The woman curved her eyes somewhat smugly and said, "Let's not say this outside for now, to avoid being caught." Shi Zhu nodded and said, "I know." "All right," the woman raised her hand. "Let this palace see what kind of person this Crown Princess is." When Xiao Changyin and Yun Zhao walked nearby, a woman happened to come over. She covered the corners of her lips with a handkerchief, her beautiful eyes flowing, and jokingly said, "The Crown Prince and the Crown Princess are indeed in love. This is still outside, so let's hold hands." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Rules. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Rules. After hearing these words, Xiao Changyin didn't let go and introduced himself to Yun Zhao. "This is Consort Zheng." After thinking for a moment, Yun Zhao didn't show any respect and only bent his knee in an almost imperceptible curve. "I've seen Empress Zheng," he said. Zheng Fei's eyes flickered with a trace of displeasure, but she did an excellent job on her face. "She is truly a rare beauty. The strange prince has never been married, so she is waiting for you." Zheng Fei reached out her hand, ready to take Yun Zhao's hand and do some face-to-face combat with her. "Anyway, this is also the princess of Yun Kingdom, and her dowry is still half of Yun Kingdom's territory." At first, when she learned about this marriage, concubine Zheng was completely stunned and wished she had fainted on the spot. If the princess of Yun Kingdom wants to marry to Beishao and still carries half of the country, why can't she marry her son? Consort Zheng had a quarrel with the emperor over this matter, but it was not successful. After all, even if the emperor agrees, the courtiers in the entire court will not agree. So in the end, Empress Zheng turned around and advised the emperor to accept this marriage, feeling both aggrieved and sensible, and then gained a lot of benefits from the emperor's praise. Yun Zhao lifted his eyelids and without a trace, withdrew his empty hand back into his sleeve. "I didn't show any face in my behavior, but a gentle smile appeared on my face, as if I hadn't seen the hand extended by concubine Zheng." For a moment, the atmosphere around him froze. The attendant bamboo beside concubine Zheng was so frightened that she couldn't even breathe lightly. After serving concubine Zheng for over a decade, she knew more than anyone about her temperament. Zheng Fei's eyes looked angry, and the smile at the corner of her mouth had long froze. "I wonder what the Crown Princess means." Yun Zhao looked up innocently, seemingly not understanding why Empress Zheng asked this question. She looked at Xiao Changyin again and threw the pot at him. Sure enough, in the eyes of Consort Zheng, this was instructed by Xiao Changyin. Yes, and even with his noble status, this is also Beishao. A princess who has married from a long distance and doesn't even have many confidants around her, how could she be in love with a favored concubine? Moreover, this princess looks young and probably doesn't have so much ambition. So concubine Zheng glared angrily at Xiao Changyin. Xiao Changyin slightly closed his eyelids and said, I still need to take the crown princess around, so I won't delay here. After speaking, Xiao Changyin expressionlessly picked another direction and left with Yun Zhao. In no time, all the teacups on the stone table in the pavilion were shattered on the ground. The tea spreads and flows slowly. Having been with concubine Zheng for many years, Shizhu quickly had an idea that could make concubine Zheng feel happier. Empress should be happy. Concubine Zheng sneered, why, this palace has been looked down upon by 2 younger generations, so you should still feel happy. Seeing Zheng Fei's dark expression, Shizhu's heart trembled. Empress has great ideas. Shizhu gave her a careful look and continued, Empress saw it just now. The crown prince clearly doesn't like the crown princess, and the crown princess seems to be not friendly with the crown prince. So, her voice became even more cautious. If the Cloud Kingdom knew that their daughter had been neglected by her husband, they wouldn't have followed the crown prince. Zheng Fei seemed to be pondering, and this was also true. These days, she did hear that the crown prince was very unhappy with the crown princess, and even the wedding night was forced by his majesty. Being able to use half of the land as a dowry, I believe this crown princess is very favored in the kingdom of Yun. If one knew that such a precious daughter had suffered injustice, even a clay figurine would inevitably feel angry. You're right, Zheng Fei casually picked a peony and exerted force on her fingers. The overflowing juice stained her pink nails with color. Her legitimate and illegitimate status. She is not yet in a hurry. But it's also fast. Not long after, everything that happened here spread to the emperor's ears. He didn't think there was any problem with the attitude of the crown prince and the crown princess towards Empress Zheng, but for a moment, he felt that the crown prince's actions were very inappropriate. He instructed the crown prince to accompany the crown princess, but who knew the crown prince would hold her hand and walk almost the entire palace. Unfortunately, his face still smelled bad, and at first glance he was unwilling. The emperor covered his forehead with his hand and felt a headache. He is not willing for the crown prince and the crown princess to be too close, especially having some doubts about the crown prince's sudden change of plan to attack Yun Kingdom. But the matter has become a foregone conclusion, and further investigation by him will be of no use. Fortunately, the ruler of Yun Kingdom is someone who loves his daughter. Marrying his daughter is equivalent to surrendering to Beishao. Just the crown prince treating the crown princess. The emperor kept tapping on the table with his fingers, and soon asked the person next to him, I remember today is 15. On the 1st and 15th days of the Lunar New Year, the emperor must rest with the empress. In the past decade or so, many rules have been broken by the emperor, but this rule has been adhered to. As for the reason behind it, even he himself may not be willing to delve deeper. Go tell the queen that I will have dinner tonight. Shouwen's eyes flickered and he quickly lowered his head, yes. When the empress learned that the emperor was coming to eat, she ordered the small kitchen to make some food at random. After thinking about it, she asked people to make 2 more dim sum. At night, when the emperor came over and saw the exquisite dishes and delicious pastries, his eyes darkened and his mood immediately became unhappy. So the words spoken were also quite impolite. As the crown prince, Changyin's conduct was very unethical. The queen slowly looked up and said, "What's wrong?" The emperor choked and felt guilty when he said this, but he quickly came up with an excuse he had already thought of. With a cold face, he said, "Now I am still the crown prince, and the crown princess is also the princess of the kingdom of Yun. This marriage is for the sake of peace between the 2 countries, so he dares to mistreat the crown princess. If in the future. If something." The emperor didn't continue, and his face was also very embarrassed. He thought of himself. The queen also thought of the past and couldn't help but laugh out loud. This clearly accompanied mocking laughter made the emperor very angry, and he put down one sentence. If the crown princess suffers injustice, I don't mind changing to a new crown prince. The queen gave him a faint glance, stood up with her back to him, walked into the inner hall, and then locked the door. This kind of scene has happened every month for over a decade, so the palace officials have not shown any signs of shock, but they are still cautious and careful when facing the emperor. And this sentence quickly spread out. Combined with the flowing rewards entering the Fanghua Hall and the crown prince's appearance of having to stay in the hall even though he has a bad face, the rumors are even more believed to be true. The crown prince does not like the crown princess, while his majesty highly values the crown princess. Even the next day, the Fanghua Palace dragged out a few palace attendants, who were obviously not interested in gossiping with Zhao on the day of their wedding. However, Xiao Changyin seemed to have listened to the emperor's reprimand and spent almost all of his time in the Fanghua Hall, except for attending court and political affairs. The palace people in the East Palace have been cleaned up, and those who remain at this time are particularly respectful to Zhao, at least on the surface. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Responsibilities. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Responsibilities. The East Palace had a rare calmness and tranquility, but Zhao felt a bit annoyed. Her gaze fell on the side of the bedside pillow, a grass-woven little dog. The window opened, and the wind blew in, causing the tail to sway slightly. From a distance, it looked as if it was real. She walked over, pulled out a wooden box from under the bed, opened it, and casually threw the little dog inside. A half-box gadget. Every day, Thunder appeared motionless by her bedside. I estimate that this small box won't fit in another month. She looked for a while, then closed the box in frustration and kicked it in with her foot. On the second day after these little things appeared, she took them and asked Xiao Changyin, but he didn't admit it and even sarcastically said that she was delusional, did it herself, and said he did it as a gift. Upon hearing this, Zhao became angry and, disregarding his previous memory of calmness, directly scolded Xiao Changyin. She didn't have a gentle temperament before, and it's not easy for her to endure it until now. Mui, standing on the side, was trembling with fear. Xiao Changyin glanced at her and fiercely threw down a sentence, "Father, I will treat you kindly." Then he angrily brushed his sleeves and left. The implication is that if it weren't for the emperor, she wouldn't have been the crown princess at all. Upon hearing this, Zhao felt a bit tempted to burn a few sticks of incense, regardless of which deity or Buddha he sought, so that the emperor could cut off his breath as soon as possible. But before this thought could turn around a few times, she was taken to the emperor's place. Xiao Changyin was also there, his face very ugly. The emperor scolded Xiao Changyin in front of Zhao and then kindly told him that if the crown prince bullied her again, he would come over and say that he would definitely make the decision for her. Zhao looked at the emperor, then at Xiao Changyin, and nodded. After returning, Zhao locked the small wooden box and ordered someone to throw it out, thinking that this time there would be no more small things for no reason. But the next day, when she subconsciously turned her head, she saw a rabbit facing her, just like the one she threw into the pond in Cloud Country. Zhao sat up, hands on his knees, and stared closely at the man who had already stood up not far away. Xiao Changyin rested at the Fanghua Hall. Of course, this was not his voluntary choice. At first, he rested in the outer courtyard, was rushed over, and then ran to the side hall. As a result, the side hall was almost demolished by the people brought by Shoan. There's no way, he can only rest here. The Fanghua Palace is so large that it is not impossible to have 2 beds, or even a small bed. However, during this period, Xiao Changyin was found sleeping on a small bed by Aunt Xiu once. So the two of them could only sleep on the same bed. Zhao hurriedly came down and took a few steps to grab the rabbit. He opened his hand in front of him and asked, "Isn't that right?" The man raised his eyebrows and said, "What is this? If it weren't for you putting it next to my pillow, who else would it be?" Zhao tried to endure the urge to punch him. Xiao Changyin had not yet put on his outer robe, and his inner garment was loose and shapely. At this moment, he slowly tidied up his inner garment, inadvertently revealing a large area of skin. Yun Zhao instinctively looked at his hand when he didn't speak, until he saw this scene and couldn't help but quickly avert his gaze. Although they got married twice, they haven't really done anything yet. The man released his hand and frowned, saying, "You come." Yun Zhaoxing's eyes widened and she said, "What?" With a leather strap in his hand, Yun Zhao realized the meaning of his words. "Are you asking her to help him dress?" Before Yun Zhao could refuse, he held her hand and placed it on his collar, saying, "This is your responsibility as the crown princess." "Why, does the crown princess want to go against her wishes?" Yun Zhao immediately turned off the engine and angrily put the leather belt aside to tidy up his clothes. She wouldn't help people put on clothes, especially the clothing of a man from Beishao. After working on it for a long time, she wrinkled the clothes and chose not to see them clearly. She brought the leather to him and buttoned it up before leaving. "Anyway, it's not her who goes out in this outfit." Xiao Changyin kept looking at her like this, and Yun Zhao felt uneasy when he saw her. He forgot to investigate the little rabbit and quickly turned around to change clothes on the other side. Watching her tiptoe and leave quickly, Xiao Changyin chuckled lightly before casually sorting out the messy clothes. After he had been away for a long time, Yun Zhao finally remembered her purpose. She looked under the bed and sure enough, the small wooden box was placed there intact. Yun Zhao stared at the things inside the small wooden box and threw the little dog inside, venting his anger by kicking the box hard inside. During breakfast, she thought of Xiao Changyin's words and hesitated for a moment before asking Qiuyue, "Auntie Qiu, according to the rules of Beishao, should the crown princess dress the crown prince?" Yun Zhao felt that this was Xiao Changyin's nonsense, just to tease her. Autumn Moon's eyes turned and she said with a smile, "There is such a rule. It's because I was confused and forgot to tell the crown princess earlier." Yun Zhao felt strange, but she had never been a crown princess before, and it was not easy for her to ask the Empress about it. She could only nod reluctantly. "Just put on your clothes, it's not her who went out wrinkled." Autumn Moon instructed people to cook tea, while Su used to stay by Yun Zhao's side. There were only 2 palace attendants standing at the entrance of the inner hall. She glanced quietly and said cautiously, "Crown Princess, the princess has followed me to Beishao." Yun Zhao was holding a string of bodhisattvas in his hand, and his fingers were intentionally or unintentionally teasing the tassels hanging below. At this moment, upon hearing Su Shi's words, his hands stiffened and he furrowed his brows slightly, asking, "Yun Shui Ling?" "Yes," Su Shi said in a low voice, with a worried expression on her face. "I heard it was coming from behind the scenes, so she immediately approached the Zheng family." Yun Zhao remained silent for a while and said, "Then she's quite impressive." I could hear the admiration in Yun Zhao's tone, and I didn't know how to say anything that I had always wanted Yun Zhao to be careful of Yun Shuiling. In the afternoon, Yun Zhao became annoyed when he saw Xiao Changyin's face as if he had been driven over. He took Su Shi to the imperial garden for a walk. Before taking a few steps, she saw a gust of wind rushing towards her with a bluish-purple hue. She was startled and quickly turned to her side. It was a young man, with a flushed face and a kuju in his hand. "I've seen fourth auntie," he said with a low head and a smile. Qiuyue hurriedly walked over and said, "This is the 7th prince." Yun Zhao touched his sleeve and felt empty. She came out to wander around because she was annoyed by Xiao Changyin. Who knew she even met a junior? She didn't bring a gift for the meeting, so she thought it would be better to have someone deliver it later. The 7th Prince Xiao Changluo was born of Empress Zheng, and because he had not yet married and was still young, he lived in the palace. Yun Zhao chatted with him for a while, during which he looked around and found that although it was born to the same father and had half the same bloodline, there was no similarity in appearance. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Protons. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Protons. Xiao Changluo scratched his head and quickly threw the kuju into the hands of the eunuch behind him. He wiped his hands with his clothes and said, "Fourth auntie, I'll go visit my mother first, and then come over to pay my respects later." Zhao wandered around, thinking that Xiao Changluo would come over later and had to go back first. On Xiao Changluo's side, after going back to meet concubine Zheng in a lively manner, he had to change his clothes and go out. Zheng Fei didn't know where he was going, so she casually asked. Xiao Changluo has changed into a moon-white robe, with a black palace belt around his waist. "Mother, I'll go see my fourth brother and have dinner there tonight." The smile on concubine Zheng's face froze instantly. The emperor had a total of 7 princes, with Xiao Changyin walking 4 and Xiao Changluo walking 7, who were also the youngest. At this moment, Empress Zheng prefers her son to befriend other princes. "You go and come back as soon as you go. Your fourth brother is not as idle as you, and he spends his days worrying about court affairs. Don't disturb him." Zheng Fei tried her best not to let Xiao Changluo hear anything wrong in her tone. She did a lot of dirty things, but never showed any signs in front of her son. It is also rare that he has developed a pure and virtuous heart by the side of Empress Zheng. Xiao Changluo, however, did not feel that he had disturbed his elder brother. He smiled and said to Empress Zheng, "Mother, fourth brother is intelligent. There is nothing in this world that can make it difficult for him to stay. I won't stay there too long, I'll come back tonight." Xiao Changluo silently added in his heart, if fourth brother hadn't kicked him out in advance. Zheng Fei's body shook and she felt a bit dizzy. But his own son knows that if she really faints in front of him, he will definitely bring all the doctors from the hospital with him in a grand manner. "We will never give up until we find a problem. Let's go, let's go." She simply turned a blind eye and thought to herself that it was time to move forward with some things. When Zhao returned, Xiao Changyin was not in the Fanghua hall, but in the study of the side hall. I discussed things with several staff members. Xiao Changyin held an open letter in his hand and slowly placed it on the candlestick to burn. One of the staff members, Su Jing, had a serious expression and frowned, saying, "Your Highness, your Majesty's birthday is approaching, and the state of Chu has sent a princess to congratulate you." A slightly darker-skinned person named Liao Yu next to Su Jing continued, "I think the state of Chu is interested in the position of the 7th prince's consort." The letter was quickly burned to ashes, and the man took out a handkerchief and wiped his fingertips, looking at several people. Not only that, but the emperor also intended to invite the Crown Prince of Yunyang, to come to congratulate him on his birthday. At first, none of the staff realized that what was said was wrong, but upon reflection, if it were not wrong, the Crown Prince would not have said it intentionally. So Su Jing tentatively asked, "Is it a proton?" As soon as the words, "proton," were mentioned, the others became clear. Su Jing quietly looked up at Xiao Changyin. Recently, he had become increasingly unable to grasp His Highness's thoughts. However, upon hearing these words, it is evident that His Highness does not want the Crown Prince of Yun to work as a proton in Beishao. It's not difficult to find a reason for this. Although the Crown Prince is the Crown Prince, he actually has little support behind him. At least on the surface. And seriously, the Crown Princess and the Kingdom of Yun are actually one of the Crown Prince's talismans. Your Majesty must consider Yun Kingdom no matter what you want to do. The premise is that Yunhua is not completely controlled by Beishao. The current situation is as follows. Xiao Changyin's army of northern Xiao, who stayed in the state of Yun, only had 10,000 soldiers, and half of the Crown Princess's territory was the 16 cities of Yun, with a royal decree above it. But it would be different if the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Yun came over as a proton. The royal family of the Kingdom of Yun had only one Crown Prince and one Princess, and they all came over, which can be considered as directly capturing the Kingdom of Yun. Su Jing was worried, Your Majesty's decision may be difficult to change. Liao Yu also said, if we don't let Yunguo pretend to be sick, it's the same to call someone from the royal family to come over and congratulate us on our birthday. Xiao Changyin said, since my father wants Yunyang to congratulate him on his birthday, it's not possible for anyone else. However, he will send someone over and then leave. Liu Shan. Xiao Changyin looked over. Liu Shan, who had been huddled at the back, widened his eyes in surprise and said, I'm here. Let concubine Zheng know that Father Emperor intends to establish a relationship between the two surnames of Chu. Yes. As he was speaking, Mui at the door gently brushed the dust and knocked on the door with a gloomy expression, Your Highness, the seventh prince is visiting. Although there was no mention of the seventh prince, it could still be considered related to him, so the expressions of the several people were very complicated for an instant. Xiao Changyin was very comfortable, but he waved his hand and gestured for the others to leave first, then walked out. Where is the crown princess? Just returned soon. Mu Yi glanced at Xiao Changyin and said, the crown princess asked someone to throw the wooden box out. When Xiao Changyin looked over, Mu Yi quickly held his breath and continued, I have already instructed you to go over. I will release it later when the crown princess is not paying attention. Others may not know, but Mu Yi is clear. In this study, there are still 2 little rabbits hidden. Send the bowl of sweet soup from the kitchen to the crown princess, said Xiao Changyin. When Mu Yi passed, Xiao Changluo happened to come over. He stopped and bowed to Xiao Changluo. In his spare time, he caught a glimpse of a jade pendant in Xiao Changluo's hand, which had some special patterns carved on it. He thought for a moment and guessed that this was probably the meeting gift given by the crown princess to the seventh prince. Mu Yi sighed and went to the pantry to bring the sweet soup. I still wonder what's going on between the crown prince and the crown princess. He has lived for most of his life and cannot see the situation clearly. While Mu Yi was still walking, he saw several guards walking over with a cold face. There is a dark blue token hanging around the waist, which is the emperor's close attendant. With a chill in his heart, Mu Yi walked over and asked, but does your majesty have something to tell his highness? The leading guard shook his head and looked expressionlessly at the wooden box in the hand of the eunuch behind Mu Yi. The other guard walked over directly and picked up the wooden box. When the few of them came over, there was no movement, and when they left, it was also quiet. Mu Yi stood still for a while before his face suddenly changed. Go and invite the imperial physician over, he said. He usually smiles, and it's rare for him to have a serious appearance at this moment. The eunuch was startled and ran out in a panic. In no time, the imperial physician came over carrying a medicine box. Mu Yi took a deep breath and took the imperial physician to the dining room, asking him to check everything for any abnormalities. The imperial physician dared not delay, so he put down the medicine box and carefully examined it. End of this chapter.